Welcome to the Sound of Economics and to our year-end podcast brought to you today by Maria de Merzis, Bruegel's Deputy Director, and myself. I'm Guntram Wolf, the Director of Bruegel. And we are today talking to each other, but also talking to a number of our senior fellows about what they really take away from 2018. What were the big events that marked the year in terms of economic policies, but also, of course, what each of us thinks about the next year, 2019, what will be the big political economy events to watch out for, and what do we really think should be on the focus of those that will take the leadership of the European Union here in Brussels at the end of next year. So this is the idea of today's podcast. The idea is to have a series of short interventions by each of us. We cannot discuss among each other very much, but we do think it's interesting to hear the various views of senior fellows at Bruegel on these issues. So I guess we perhaps start with you, Maria. It's been an interesting year. We worked, of course, intensively together on all these big economic issues that came to the table of the European Union. So which ones would you sort of highlight for what you will remember of 2018?
Yeah, thanks, Guntram, and also very warm welcome on my behalf to all our guests who will hear from today. One is, of course, always tempted to think of the year past as an eventful year, but I think we've had a decade of that now, so I don't think that 2018 has been more remarkable than any other years. There has been a number of interesting events, from preparing for Brexit to elections. But I think the one thing that I would like to put out as the memorable event would be elections in Italy. I think they were perhaps the one event that I thought might bring us back to some of the less well remembered, in the sense of less appreciated, of events of 2015. There was a narrative in the pre-election campaign in Italy that resembled very much something that was seen back in 2015, that had the makings of putting Europe again in a position that would very much like not to be there. I don't think we've gotten there. That's the good news. There was a risk, but it turned out that this risk was not as big as one would have thought before the elections. The electoral outcomes are what they are. They're part of a democratic process. But what events subsequently have shown is that there hasn't been really a confrontation about important big issues, even though the disagreements exist and the disagreements are being worked out. So in that respect, I think Italian elections were a reminder of the fact that Europe will still have these problems of having sovereign countries having to deal with commitments that are being done across electoral cycles, and they are less well managed in Europe, simply because the architecture in Europe is not there yet. So that would be my one event to remember.
So indeed, Italy was and came as a big shock, and I'd argue even now remains a challenge for the European Union, the clear confrontation of different political views. At the same time, I think, as you rightly argue, it's also a sign of resilience of the Eurozone. I mean, we have seen a rise in spreads. I think there have been economic costs attached with this rise in spread, but we've also seen what I would call willingness to, in the end compromise. But of course, it comes at a cost. It comes at a political cost in Italy. It comes at a political cost in the rest of Europe, and it comes at an economic cost, because the standoff has meant spreads were higher for several months, of course, with negative consequences on economic activities. So I guess looking at that, and I think indeed we both agree it's a sign of an incomplete monetary union of sovereign states that share a currency and that find it difficult to stick to long-term commitments over electoral cycles. So looking into 2019, what do you watch out for, Maria?
Oh, well, I think there's a number of candidate issues, but if I were to pick one, I would certainly pick the issue of Brexit. March 2019 will mark, in all senses of the word, uncharted territory. We have not seen Europe in reverse before. We have, God knows whether we will see it, but it looks like we will. And what would be important to watch out is what this means in practical terms, but also what it means about the future of the relationship between the UK and the rest of Europe. The UK will remain part of the family. You cannot argue that simply because they're exiting an institutional arrangement, they're not part of the family anymore. At least that's the way that I see it. But they will not be as close to that family as they are currently. And that, of course, changes the dynamics. So it would be with...
they're not coming to Christmas dinner anymore.
They're not coming to Christmas dinner anymore. That's very unfortunate. But again, they are part of the family and, they would be welcome to future Christmas dinners should they wish to be. But that would be the thing to watch, the uncertainty that the event will bring, how it will work out, and the dynamics for Europe.
Well, I'm now joined by our senior fellow, Thomas Wieser, who joins us from Austria, to reflect on what were the outstanding events of 2018, the things that will stick to our memory, but perhaps even more importantly, what he thinks will be the main issues going forward. So Thomas, perhaps we start by looking back. I mean, if you look back at 2018, you were still at the beginning of the year in public service, and then you left and you saw how the situation in Europe and around the world evolved. What do you think are the sort of the key issues that will stay in your mind?
Well, looking back at 2018, one has the historic memory of huge volatility, nationalism, populism, of countries trying to become more and more entrenched, even within the EU, behind their own national borders. The astonishing thing is that almost all the politicians in charge of these traits were around already at the beginning of the year. That implies that they felt more empowered during the year to enact these policies. And that, for me, is probably in the medium and long term, the greatest risk that we are facing. How to ensure that growth, that employment policies are geared towards providing people with employment, reducing inequality, and I think that is one of the big preconditions for strengthening the European Union as a whole. The second issue is that we appear to be coming to an end of the upswing that we have been enjoying. For some countries, this is definitely too early. Think of Greece, think of Italy. But this also shows that we need to continue working firmly on those policies that enhance overall output growth potential of our economies. And much of what we have been seeing recently are fiscal stimuli that do nothing to increase overall productivity, but just short-term growth, which will then peter out possibly at the expense of long-term fiscal sustainability. And the third issue is that even in Europe, for some too early, for some too late, we are nearing the end of monetary easing. And the question is how this will impact on the different parts of the financial market of the European Union. So these are the three more remarkable things that I take from 2018, but also looking towards 2019 and beyond, of course.
Thank you, Thomas. So we clearly have three big topics: nationalism, productivity, and the petering out of easy monetary policy as three big issues that have started this year and that will certainly shape next year. Now, if I can ask you to give sort of one recommendation, what you would say the new incoming leadership in Brussels, so in the fall of next year, should focus on particularly. I mean, they cannot really fix national policies. Should they focus, and they cannot do monetary policies, should they focus on productivity and a productivity agenda, single market agenda, or would you go down a different road?
That's a very good question. I think the single market and the productivity increases and boosts that this engenders is probably, in the long run, that which not only unites all EU member states, but offers the best avenue towards overall productivity growth as far as the EU level is concerned. And we should never forget, and also financial stability to a certain extent lie with national governments, which sometimes seems to be forgotten. So focusing on the internal market issues in the wider sense would seem to me to be not maybe the top priority of the incoming Commission, but one of the top economic policy priorities of the incoming leadership.
Great. Thank you very much, Thomas.
We turn next to our senior fellow, Andre Sapir, who is also joining us from Brussels. He is not in the studio, but he will join us through Skype.
Yes, hello.
Hello, Andre. This is Maria. Andre, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to ask you, like what we ask all our other scholars, looking back in 2018, which event would be the most remarkable in your opinion?
Well, a year ago, last December, when I was reflecting about what could happen in 2018, I feared there would be a trade war. And I feared that words that Mr. Trump had been uttering would come to action. And that has been the case. And we are really seeing a different world. First, Mr. Trump attacked a number of countries, including the European Union, about steel, and then he really launched an all-out war, a trade war against China. And I think the world trading system has really entered into a totally different era, with fears that indeed we may be seeing the end of an era pretty soon. So to me, this was really a major event. The United States, which had been really the founding father of the GATT and then of the WTO, that essentially turned its back to the multilateral trading system, moved into aggressive unilateral action.
Thank you very much, Andre. So a world of an era is changing. The world trading system is coming into a new era. How do you think this is going to play out in 2019?
So I think this is the question that everybody wonders, whether what we saw in 1918 is the prelude to something even worse to come in 2019. We know that the WTO is clearly in danger, or at least a very important part of the WTO, which is the dispute settlement mechanism. So far, the US administration has blocked the appointment of judges whose term has come to an end, of new judges to the WTO dispute settlement body. And if it continues to do so, then I think in the latter part of 2019, we may have a dysfunctional WTO dispute settlement body. And, you know, many people have said, and I would concur with that that the dispute settlement mechanism is the jewel of the crown of the WTO that was created in the mid 1990s. So, harming the dispute settlement body would really be a severe blow to the WTO system, to the rules-based system.
So these are material threats to the multilateral system. André, thank you very much.
Okay, so we are now joined by Nicolas Veron, who joins us from Washington, D.C. And as with all the other scholars, I want to first ask Nicolas about what you think, Nicolas, have been the main issues that will stick to your mind in 2018, and what do you think should be the main issues to watch out for in 2019?
For me, 2018 was primarily a year of a big missed opportunity for euro area reform. Remember September 2017, the State of the Union speech of Jean-Claude Juncker: repair the roof while the sun is shining, we have wind in our sails. There was a feeling at that time of a unique opportunity after the French and German elections that would open up for a meaningful push for euro area reform, finishing the job that was started during the crisis and make the euro area more resilient, particularly with the completion of banking union and possibly also a better framework in terms of fiscal policy. This opportunity has been lost. It has been lost for a number of different reasons: the time it took to form the German coalition, the election and coalition formation in Italy, and the broader environment. But it is a shame that what looked a year ago like a really favorable, uniquely favorable environment to complete the job that European leaders had committed to has been completely missed. Now, that's, of course, not a reason to despair. And there is a silver lining to particularly the Italian situation, which has been a powerful reminder to everybody of how much work still needed to be done, how much work needed to be done on banking union, the reappearance of the bank sovereign vicious circle in the case of Italian banks being whacked by the market when there were doubts about sovereign credit worthiness, and also about the complete weakness of the fiscal framework. So that gives hope for the future that complacency will not set in, but clearly there is a bit of a bitter feeling about what could have happened in 2018 and didn't.
So looking ahead at 2019 then, Nicolas, what do you watch out for, and what would you recommend to the new leadership that will come in towards the end of the year here in Brussels? So let's say not the ECB president. What would you recommend to the new Commission president coming in, and what would you watch out for during the year 2019?
Maybe at a broader level, the lesson of the 2018 missed opportunity is that the Franco-German engine is really no longer relevant for European policy, even Eurozone policy. Maybe the illusion was to think that a common French-German position would be enough to achieve reform for the Eurozone, and that therefore the coincidence of German and French electoral timetables was a unique opportunity, as was framed by Juncker and others in late 2017. So if that's true, the big event of 2019 is the European Parliament election, because maybe we're at a stage of European integration where it's no longer good to think about coalitions of member states, even the two largest of them, but we really need to think about a European political mandate. And only the European Parliament election has potentially that power. So I think this election in late May is really crucial. It's probably not going to give an explicit, specific policy mandate to the next commission, but it will give a direction of travel, and that's really in the hand of the voters. So if there is a direction that is broadly constructive, I think the opportunity should not be missed to think again about how to complete the job of Eurozone strengthening, and especially completing the banking union on the basis of that at the European level directly. Commission, it has actually not achieved anything meaningful in terms of Eurozone reforms. They made a bold proposal for European deposit insurance, but as we know, this has been stuck among the co-legislators, specifically in Council. And otherwise, all the meaningful Eurozone reform and banking union legislation is actually from the Barroso Commission. So I think there has to be a swing of the pendulum here. It has to be hoped that the European Parliament election in late May will give the minimum mandate that the next Commission will need to achieve more, especially in the area of banking union, which I work most on. Achieve a package where sovereign exposures would be tackled, where deposit insurance would be brought at the European level, and that would therefore achieve the aim to defragment the European banking system.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. These are good and great wishes for 2019. Let's see what will happen, actually. Thank you.
And happy holidays in the meantime.
Indeed. Thank you.
We are now going to call our colleague Jean Pisani-Ferry, who is in Paris. Hello, Jean. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
We are going to ask you the same question that we did with the other scholars, and we're going to ask you to look back in 2018 and tell us which event or which fact or which information was the most remarkable of the year.
Well, we learned a number of things in 2018. We learned that the US protectionism was for real. That was not a sort of a purely political posturing. We learned that the US-China confrontation was for real, and that it was bound to structure international relation, also with an impact on the economic sphere. We learned that the populist tide in Europe and elsewhere hadn't been stopped. We had the election in Italy. We had the formation of the new coalition in Italy with quite a strong anti-European tone, or at least a tense relationship with the institutions. And obviously, we had also the Brazilian election, and we have the Gilets jaunes movement in France, which showed that even in the country that was considered, bucking the trend, it was not really the case. So that's the legacy. Now, for 2019, I'm afraid we're going to see the same, but in a more difficult economic context. We don't yet see the recession coming, but clearly the expansion has peaked. Clearly, a number of economies are at the end of the cycle. The US will by June. The length of the US economic expansion will be the longest on record since data have been compiled. So the longest expansion in history. And we're seeing the confrontation, the fight between the Federal Reserve and the Trump administration, especially the president himself, on the wisdom of doing for the Fed for doing its job and rising interest rate. So the recession risk is looming, and we have to get prepared for a still very tense, difficult political situation, but in a more difficult economic context. So I'm afraid it's not very optimistic what I'm saying.
Okay, Jean, thanks very much. If you were to pick one event for 2019 to look out for, what would that be?
Well, for Bruegel, we have to look at the European Parliament elections. It's still highly uncertain what will emerge from it, but it's certainly going to be a very, very different, much more, adversarial type of debate that we're going to see in the European Parliament election and after in the Parliament itself. Now, the big question for the European Parliament election is it going to be the opportunity for a real choice? Not meaning a choice at national level between different parties, but meaning something that has, a meaning for Europe. We are facing major choices. We're facing major choices as regards security. We're facing major choices as regards our own values as regards the relationship with Britain, the way we want to deal with a different world in which the US plays a fundamentally different role. And all that should be an opportunity for European citizens to express their views and their wishes. Now, the question is, will this campaign provide such an opportunity? I think it's not a normal time at all for Europe. I mean, it's not the kind, we wouldn't wish to have the kind of debate we're having normally in European Parliament election. We would wish the minds to concentrate on these big choices. Now, it's not clear that it's going to happen.
So Jean, I can't resist asking you about the relevance of social media and new ways of doing campaigns. I mean, all the things you mentioned in your first answer, Bolsonaro in Brazil got elected on a very efficient WhatsApp campaign. The Gilets jaunes certainly was strongly influenced by Facebook and was organized on Facebook. Brexit has worked to a significant extent also based on social media and faulty media policy. And there is strong evidence that in the swing states in the US, Trump got elected the Trump fake news and Russian bots did influence particularly people in swing states. So I guess one question I have for you is how strongly do you think and how relevant is this, let's say, these new forms of communication for the political dissatisfaction that we are seeing in election outcomes? How much of the blame do you think goes to that, and how much goes to, let's say, the real underlying fundamentals, of which we have, of course, a lot of things to worry about, be it inequality, be it the increase of wealth in the top 1%. And many other factors. So there's the real economic issues, the real political issues, and then there is ways of magnifying messages and reshaping campaigns. So how do you see this tension between those factors?
I would see it exactly the way you're putting it. I mean, we shouldn't consider that it's all about the sort of the way the debate is structured and not about the underlying issues. The underlying issues are there. Now, what we're seeing is a new way of structuring the political debate, and that gives a voice to people who usually didn't have a voice or were sort of structured in existing organization and were choosing between existing organizations. They couldn't unbundle. There was a sort of supply, and they couldn't unbundle. They had to choose. Now they do unbundle. They're building their own combinations based on information that's provided by people they trust. So let's even put aside the sort of the Russia meddling but the very fact that people believe in their neighbors, in what their neighbors say, in what their community says, and don't believe in any media and any official information anymore. That changes entirely the political conversation. We've seen that in the Gilets jaunes. We had also Facebook changing its algorithm, and this is having profound impact on the information people have access to. Essentially, this narrows the scope. So basically, they're receiving information. They're taking information from a very narrow community of people, of like-minded people, and even people who live in the neighborhood. So this sort of fragmentation is definitely changing the political conversation. This is, I mean, we need to have a very fundamental discussion about democracy, about what it means. I mean, it has been opened. I mean, there is now, growing research on the structures of democracy, on the fragility of democracy. I think that's something, including we as economists, have to take on board and learn from.
Indeed, Jean, thank you very much for this very fundamental reflections. I'm sure we have an opportunity to talk about this in the future. But we turn next to Elena Rybakova, our non-resident fellow who is joining us from London.
Hello.
Hi, Elena. It's Maria. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us. Just as we asking other scholars, we would like to hear your thoughts on what you thought was the most memorable event in 2018.
Thank you very much, Maria. My most memorable event is actually Argentine devaluation in the summer of this year, in August. The dramatic devaluation that started in spring, but then had the last kick in August. And I do focus on emerging markets. And most of my colleagues who look at emerging markets probably will remember that event very clearly as well. That is memorable for a number of reasons. And I think first is that the IMF program was miscalculated the first couple of times they tried to come back to Argentina. And the fact that IMF is coming back to Argentina, of course, is memorable in itself after many years of very confrontational relationship. But the fact that they miscalculated the size and the position of the program, I think is very significant. And to me, it means maybe we're misunderstanding something about the way the market dynamics works. Argentine peso, I think, is very close to fair value now and was possibly even close to fair value in the summer. So what went wrong? I think the most important factor for this year and possibly for next is investor positioning. Rather than looking at fundamentals, which actually have come close to fair value, not only in Argentina, but many other countries, I think we're all carefully looking at positioning of the real or institutional money asset managers. And why is that important? Because since the global financial crisis, we have regulated significantly and severely, some might say, the banks. And the banks have turned more into brokers that are not holding any positions. Of course, that makes the banking system much safer, and the deposits that the individuals hold with the banks also much safer. However, with the expansion of the monetary policy by the large central banks, we have driven rates lower and the curves flatter. And that has led to large accumulation of assets under management in the non-bank financial institutions. We can call them shadow banking, or we can call them anything else, but these are institutional asset managers that receive a lot of pension fund, insurance money, mutual funds, and allocate them to various emerging markets and other assets. And that is what is key now, driving the way that we're looking at the markets. A lot of these institutional asset managers focus only on benchmark investing and therefore can be prone to herding behavior. At the same time, their positions are so significant that no other player on the other side, like bank or hedge fund, would be able to pick up opportunity when that arises. And I think that's exactly what happened in Argentina, especially in August, when the president mentioned that they would like to increase the size of the IMF program, or rather bring some borrowing forward. Nobody would have expected such a massive devaluation that occurred the following day. And that most likely happened with very limited liquidity, with other investors already heavily positioned in Argentina and no marginal buyer found in place. And I think this event is very important to me, the way I think about the 2018 and also 2019, given that we're exiting significant QE, the Fed already is moving on the tightening, and we're looking at ECB as well. How was that?
The changing nature of the global financial system, and can you bring it closer to the EU, and how do you think this playing out in the EU?
I think for the EU, it's also very important. And if you look at the Italian spreads, the very sort of flash crash reactions we have seen in spring 2018 and also in this year, I think that is important because it affects sustainability of a lot of countries' debt. We have seen QE postpone fiscal adjustment in some of these countries rather than take advantage of it. And I think that has important policy implications, that any government has to be ready to significant volatility in their spreads that might seem to be sort of hard to forecast or inexplicable by just economic fundamentals. So if somebody is looking at the Italian spreads or maybe French spreads, and they think, well, the information on the screen fully reflects the economic reality. There are lots of highly sophisticated market investors that have priced this accurately. I don't think that is true. I think until the position has to move or there is a pressure on the institutional asset manager to do something, this price on the screen might not be reflecting the reality. So you're having no information for a while, very low volatility, and suddenly a burst of a shock or very high volatility.
Thank you for that, Elena. Can you now tell us a little bit what we should watch out for 2019?
For 2019, I think it's important that we look at the capital flows to emerging markets, or rather outflows. It's an old story with the push and pull factors, and of course the push factors are subsiding. Fed is on the tightening path, and emerging markets will definitely continue to feel the pain. And positioning of institutional investors is very important. The stage at which institutional asset managers, especially in the US, will decide to scale back their exposures will definitely be felt across the world, including again in Argentina, possibly Brazil, South Africa. This is
indeed an old story of financial flows, right?
It is indeed an old story of financial flows, but
important too.
But in new disguise. I think the structure has changed of the asset management industry, the financial industry, but the story remains exactly the old-fashioned classical emerging markets push and flow and pull factors for capital flows.
That's wonderful. Thank you for reminding us of that, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So our next guest is Francesco Papadia, Senior Fellow here at Bruegel. Francesco, thank you for joining us. And can I ask you, what was the most memorable event for 2018?
Well, I think that a lot of work is taking place at Bruegel and in other places to broaden the analytical foundations of economic policy. If one is an incurable optimist, one could see this as a positive impact of the populist wave, which requires new analytical and political approaches. And there are different categories within which the intellectual effort that has developed a lot in 2018 is taking place. First, moving away from the exclusive emphasis on aggregate results to look also at distributional aspect. For example, is one or the other action leading to more growth, also leading to more or less income inequality. Second, looking also at cross-sectional evidence, not only at time series. For example, whether labor market reforms are leading to dual labor markets, thus complementing the information on the impact on employment overall. Third, broadening economic concepts. For example, looking at the economic effects of inequality and diversity on growth and employment. Fourth, looking at the composition of fiscal revenue and expenses, not only at aggregate figures. For example, is one action helping growth, but also inclusiveness and the environment? And last, adding non-economic variables to the analysis. For instance, looking at health or poverty, not as exclusive economic, but also socially relevant phenomena.
And if you were to look out for one event in 2019, what would that be?
Well, for instance, I would look at what would happen to trade negotiations, because of course we see a lot of tensions on trade negotiations, which is an important part of globalization. And it would be important to see that trade negotiations include this diversity, inequality, environment aspect into the discussion.
Thank you very much, Francesco. We have now heard from a number of senior scholars here at Bruegel, but I think it would be important to go back also to our own director. Guntram, if you were to pick an event for 2018, what would that be?
Well, Maria, I think we have heard a lot, and I think I probably agree with a lot of what I've heard. But perhaps the one thing I would certainly put very high on the agenda is the global trade conflict and the global geopolitical conflict. And I really think it's hugely important also for the European Union and the way we think about ourselves. I mean, we sort of used to live really in a world where we took the stability of the global order really for granted. We took it for granted that the United States is a friend and is supportive of European integration. We took it for granted that everybody plays by the international rules. we took it for granted that, basically we live in a world which is rules based and, based on countries sticking to their commitments. And the vigorous emergence of a conflict between the United States and China, and I would say also the increasing assertiveness of China in the field of trade, in the field of military, but also in the field of technology, where China, I think, increasingly feels to be a world leader and is actually a world leader in a number of sectors, has put a lot of pressure on European policymakers. And I think that's really where, at the end of the day, the European Union can make a difference if we really want to. So if we really work together, we can shape and be a player in this global landscape. But if we cannot really play together, we will be just a bunch of very small countries. My own home country, Germany, is only 1% of global population. So 80 million is 1% of 8 billion. So we are all very small countries. Let's face it, and let's acknowledge that countries like China have reached in parts of its economy the technological frontier. I'd say perhaps around 100 million people in China live at the technological frontier. And let's face it, the US is not the country we can fully rely on anymore, depending, of course, on political constellations in the country. But clearly, the threat of tariffs and the imposition of tariffs without any serious argument and ground on steel, I think is a watershed moment for European integration, and should lead us to think twice about how can we work together.
So a shift of powers and a necessarily shift of alliances that this implies is the event that marked a wake-up call for Europe in 2018. If you were to look ahead in 2019, would that also be the same thing to watch for?
Well, I would certainly watch out for that, but I think sort of the immediate thing to watch out for is how will European politics evolve, and how will European politics allow us to confront these global challenges? Will we be going in a direction of more national-based responses to global challenges? So more nationalistic political parties gaining in strength? Or will we see a return to let's say, parties that do share the commitment of working together and believing that working together is the best way to confront global challenges? I think that's sort of the key thing to watch out for. And I mean, that's in a few national elections, it's important, but of course also in the European Parliament. And the European Parliament by now has become a very important player in European politics, overall European politics. It is the co-legislator, so on all the important legislative files, it is crucial. For trade agreements, it is absolutely fundamental that the European Parliament supports those. And I think it was a big success this year that the European Parliament voted so strongly in favor of the EU-Japan trade agreement, which covers a third of global GDP and was a major rules-based agreement, a major signal against certainly Donald Trump's view that it's not rules-based policies, but basically bullying. That's the way we should do trade. So this was a big signal, and I think the fact that the European Parliament voted with an overwhelming majority in favor of that agreement was a strong signal. So one of the big things to look out for is what kind of European Parliament will we get. And will that European Parliament overall have supportive views of basically cooperation and strong European voice in global affairs or not?
This brings us to the end of this episode. That's all we have time for this year. Thank you to all the scholars who participated. Thank you to you, the listeners of this series. And let me also take this opportunity to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.